right, welcome to Peace of Mind Radio. I am Brian Ramsey along with Eric Douglas and Isaac LaFon, and we are talking, as a follow-up from last week, we're talking what's the difference in advisor? There's all these different terms. There's advisors, there's wealth managers, there's financial planners, we're going to throw in CPAs, we're going to throw in insurance salespeople. So it's just kind of a smattering, but what we want to do is sort of lay out who you're going to run into, who you might be working with, and sort of some things to think about or be cautious about, right?
Yep.
All right, before we get started, what's going on, guys?
Oh, kids are back in school or daycare and preschool. So life is resumed to some sort of normal for us. So, yeah, I'm super grateful, happy to cut that check.
Yeah.
Just holding my breath, waiting to see what the requirements will be to send our kids back to school here in the fall.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, today's July the 9th, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
in 2020. And no, we do not wear the same clothes every day. We shot last week's about 20 minutes right before this one. So, yes, we're sitting in the same seat. We have on the same clothes. We typically shoot two of these every other week or so. But today is July 9th, and we should be hearing today from the powers that be on exactly how we move forward in public. Which is what I'm hearing. We're going to get the rules today that I think we're going to be mask bound.
I did get some news yesterday. So my brother got his orders. He's going in the Army as an officer for as a chaplain. Okay. And he found out he's going to be stationed at Bragg.
Oh yeah.
In those of you who don't know where Bragg is, they basically set it up so I could come visit in the Sandhills of North Carolina near Pinehurst. So I was like, good, man, that's great. Also, I'm going to come visit a lot more.
Yeah, that's
depending on where you were.
Yeah, and you may have company, especially if it's that close.
I was like, we'll be in for 10 days. We have an opening Monday morning for breakfast.
Yeah, Fort Bragg may be actually changing its name from what I understand. So they may have to change the name of Fort Bragg.
TBD.
To be determined. Okay, so let's get started. So what we're doing, how we're going to approach this today is, we know that if you're reaching out to a variety of folks and you're seeking financial advice, that's kind of where we're going to stick. You're going to run into different titles and different names, and what we want to do is sort of lay out. In our experience, okay, that doesn't mean that we're going to lump that every single insurance salesperson is exactly the same. That's not the case. But just our experience is that we're putting this thing together. We all sort of sat down and said, hey, how do we view all this? And I think our experience is the same. So we're just going to lay out, typically when you run into this particular type advisor, this is some things you need to look out for. And then we're going to contrast that to how we view it. Right, how we view those type things, and it'll make a lot more sense once we get into it. So let's just take as a follow up from last week. If you didn't catch last week's show, go back and listen. We talked about term insurance and how we position term insurance and why we think term insurance fits basically 99.9% of all financial needs. Although permanent insurance makes sense, we talk about that too, and that's for another day. But another podcast will tackle more permanent insurance. But let's start off talking about insurance. Now, we got two forms of insurance. I'm going to let each of you tackle one. I don't care who tackles either one. So first of all, we have property and casualty agents, and we have life insurance that typically sell life insurance, or life insurance salespeople. So who wants to take property and casualty? Because we run into this, right? Mm-hmm. Guy sells your home and auto, says, hey, we sell annuities or we sell mutual funds. So how do we tackle that?
Well, it's basically a matter of specialties, right? So your property and casualty insurer is going to have their specialty, ideally, obviously home and auto, right? We talked about this in the last podcast, making sure we know the difference between a captive agent and an independent agent as far as, when it comes to life insurance. Actually, the same thing holds true for property and casualty insurance as well.
I would totally agree.
If you go to a State Farm, guess what? You're going to get State Farm quotes. If you go to Allstate, same thing, right? So ideally, if you are going to work with a property and casualty insurance agent, you would typically want to find an independent agent on that side as well. But what I am seeing increasingly in that world is they're trying to infringe or trying to move into the life insurance space. To be perfectly frank, it's basically about profit margins. When you start seeing, car insurance rates, and this was something I had a previous career at another auto, home, and property and casualty insurer, and this was actually talked about quite a bit because the property and casualty side was actually being squeezed because the margins on home and auto we're just decreasing to the point when you start looking out at the future, the number of people that are using Ubers and not driving nearly as much, and you start talking about self-driving cars in the next 10, 15 years. It's weird to think about now, but looking ahead, that side of the business isn't going to be as profitable. So you're starting to see a lot of those types of insurers move into the life insurance space. And so you're seeing, to your point, going into a captive agent's office and getting sold like an annuity or a mutual fund, typically going to be that captive agent's company's mutual fund or annuity. So that's certainly something to watch out for, because those they might have gone out and gotten an insurance license to sell some of those products, or even maybe a Series 7 license, something like that, to sell maybe some mutual funds, but that's not really their specialty. That's not really their lane. So it's just something to be aware of, understanding who you're working with, what their specialties are, where they lie, and understanding that if they're going to start looking at those types of options, you probably want to make sure you're getting an opinion from someone who specializes in those types of products.
Yeah, the one additional thing I'll just want to make very clear is that if you have your property and casualty insurance from what they call a captive advisor and our captive agent, and we said in the beginning of last week's show, we said that's the first question you ought to ask when you go into your insurance person or anybody. Say, are you a captive agent? And if you are one that happens to be with one of the groups that he mentioned a minute ago, that's totally fine, as long as you seek, just to seek alternatives, just to make sure that what premiums you're paying are fair. So it could be that you go out and you shop with an independent agent, and he says, hey, here's a list of 20 different companies, and here's the top 5, and it's around the same price you're paying with State Farm, for example, then that's totally fine. But there's no reason to stay with a captive insurance company if you can go out to an independent and get a lot less expensive, right? So that's the thing. The other thing I'll mention when it comes to captive or property and casualty guys is here's how kind of we see it, is exactly what Eric was talking about a minute ago. It's about staying in your lane. I like the way he puts that. So do we have conversations about property and casualty with our clients? Absolutely we do. It's part of a full balance sheet focus, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But we don't, could we quote it? Could we go out and get our license? We absolutely could. But you know what? We would rather partner with agents that are independent. We typically partner with folks that are independent because we're independent. But we typically partner with them so that we can say, okay, I need this particular home and auto quoted. We'd rather give that to an independent agent, let them quote it, and let them do what they do best. And so they refer business back to us as well, because we take care of the other side of the balance sheet. So just important that you know that. Isaac, take life insurances, which is one that we talked about last week on our show. So if you didn't get a chance to watch it, jump on our podcast, Peace of Mind Radio podcast, and YouTube channel, and listen to last week's show.
Yeah, so when it's the same in the same vein here. I mean, it's people staying in their lane. So one of the differences as we continue to move forward past kind of this, when we're talking about life insurance and somebody that is an insurance salesperson, they typically are at a large company that specialize in selling life insurance. Now, there are some advantages because those companies are really large. They have a lot of resources. They obviously have a high knowledge, acumen for that. So there are people there that are pretty well educated. It doesn't necessarily mean because someone works at those places that they're not going to recommend good things.
Right.
But it does mean there are some limitations. And kind of the way we did joke a little bit at the last episode too about, like Eric said, if all you have is a hammer, all you see is nails, right? That can be kind of a thing. Is when you have a limited toolbox, if you're applying a fiduciary standard, how can you know for certain when you're recommending things if it's only there was a funny meme one of our partners, PJ, showed me the other day, which is like charge for financial advice and recommend the company's products.
Right.
I'm an advisor. I'm going to charge you for me giving you advice, but the only things I ever recommend are things that are from this one institution. And so
it's weird how that happens, right?
Yeah. And look, we're not trying to, and again, what we're trying to do with this podcast is lay out the differences so that you as a consumer looking for a relationship,
exactly.
Or maybe in this situation, the reason you may go that route is you don't want a relationship. You're the type of person that you're like, I just don't want, Brian seems like a nice cat, but I don't want to see him 3 times a year.
Right.
That's like a lot of commitment, and I don't like commitment. And so maybe that's where this would be appropriate for a person, is if they just want to go, and that's okay with them. And so, but there are some limitations. You may have missed opportunities that you're completely unaware of, and there's going to be a limited toolbox for that advisor, no matter how ethical they may be.
Right.
And they're trying to do best they can. They are limited in what they can recommend.
Yeah. So the other thing I'll say about life insurance salespeople is, I have a very good friend who is one. So,
Yeah.
And works at a very large firm. You just have to know, right? We have to know when you're walking in there that, you walk in our office, and there is no agenda other than doing what's in your best interest. That is our only agenda, is to make sure that we're giving you proper advice. And if actually the 3 of us sat in on a meeting yesterday, and one of the things that we were talking about was sort of our company image and what we were trying to come across, and I forgot the term for it. We had to come up with our anthem, yeah. And so we had to come up with 2 different words, and I think it's very accurate that, we haven't officially come up with one yet, but we are sort of a creative educator. Now, that's not our total anthem. We make
and don't hold us to that.
Yeah, but I think that is something that we do. Is there is no sales quotas here. I don't have a sales quota. Isaac doesn't have a life insurance quota. Eric doesn't have a planning quota. Nobody has quotas here. So we're really doing things that truly in your best interest. If you go to a larger firm, and totally fine to do that, but you have to know that when you go to a salesperson in a large firm, there are sales quotas, and they're going to push whatever quota they have to meet. They're going to push that. You just have to know that. So again, I'm not saying don't go see them, but you have to be slightly guarded to know that there is an agenda here of selling a particular widget because they have a quota for it. Yeah,
the rewards conferences are based on production of certain things. It's not always the broad spectrum of even some products that company even offers aren't part of the rewards program. They lean real heavy on the permanent life insurance, is how, if you want to advance and make lots of money in those companies, that's what you do.
Yeah, so
this is what it is.
Here's a funny story. This particular person, again, works at a large firm. He literally finds he'll do a bunch of little cases, and he'll do one gigantic case, and it is this whole year. But he literally waits until the company comes out with their incentive trip, and he loads up, and he'll either sell that big case that year because he wants to go on the trip, or he'll wait until he knows what the trip is next year, and he'll hold that case over to the following year because he wants to go on that trip. I'm not joking. That literally happens. It's hilarious.
You're like, I don't want anything to happen in December.
Yeah.
If it hasn't been amazing to December, let's have it all happen in January.
Yeah, he'll say, let's see, I'm going to Aruba if I sell it this year, or I'm going to Spain next year. I kind of want to go to Spain. He'll literally say, I kind of want to go to Spain. I'll hold it till the following year. It's crazy, but that for sure happens. Okay, let's move on to the second category. And this is one that is probably the most generalized term used, and that is a financial advisor.
Yeah.
I think most people sort of use that term. But what I want to do is I want to sort of look at a financial advisor from 2 perspectives. And this is questions that if you're going in and you're talking to a financial advisor, right, you're going to want to ask how they're compensated. And this will give you the division of the 2 we're getting ready to talk about. One is a transactional advisor, and the other one is a fee advisor. Okay, because they're going to give you that's a totally different ball of wax here. So I want to spend a minute talking about that. So what do you, Eric? I'll come to you first. Transactional advisors. Do you see how do they typically work? That you, in your experience, because you covered a ton of them, right? You covered both of these guys. So, in your experience, how do you see the transactional advisor versus what we do, which we're a fee-based advisor?
Yeah, so it's right there in the word, transactional versus relationship-based. And so when you're working with a transactional advisor, that's basically a sales process. They're trying to sell you a product.
Yeah, they're just a salesperson, right?
They for all intents and purposes, and you hate to use, and I don't necessarily mean that too terribly negatively, but it is what it is. It's a sales process. They're selling you a product Once the product has been sold, it's on to the next. Think of it like a mortgage. You go, you purchase a mortgage. How often do you need to purchase a mortgage? How often do you move? Do you buy a new house? Maybe a few times in your lifetime, right? But it's not something that you continually need to take advantage of or need to use, right? So you utilize your mortgage person. It's a transaction. You use them. They use you. Everything's great, and it's fantastic, right? Most of the time anyway, hopefully. The thing about the term financial advisor you need to be very, very careful about is everyone will use it. So we talked about the insurance guys. They will use the term financial advisor to make it sound like their services are a little bit more all-encompassing than they really are.
Right.
It's really just become a kind of a catch-all phrase, and it really doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot at all times. So the question that you asked is a very, very important one. How do you get paid? Do you get paid on commissions, on transactions, or are you a fee-based advisor? Here's a resource that you can utilize to actually answer that question before you ever meet with someone. If you go to FINRA's website, they have what's called a broker check. Because anybody in our business, we're in the most highly regulated business in the universe. Anything that I do, any exam that I pass, this is for all of us. It's all detailed. It's all public record. If you go to FINRA, FINRA, you go to their website and go to their broker check. You can type in the name of anybody that you're going to go meet with, and you can see exactly what their qualifications are, how long they've been in business, what licenses that they have, and how long they've had those licenses, as well as what firms that they've worked with,
right.
And also if there's been any judgments against them as well. If you go in and see that they have a Series 7, nothing wrong with a Series 7. I've got one myself, but if that's the only exam that they've passed, that means they're licensed to sell commission products. Basically sell stocks and mutual funds and those types of things and earn a commission on it. They are not licensed to do fee-based business. What you want to look for is a Series 65 or a Series 66. When you see someone holds those exams, they are licensed and have the ability to be able to do fee-based business on a much more relationship-based level, as opposed to just providing services based on a transaction. So that's probably the number one thing that you want to look for when you're working with advisors, because the types of services that they offer are pretty much going to be dictated based upon the exams that they've passed and the licenses that they hold.
Yeah. All right. So Isaac, speaking of transactional advisors versus fee-based advisors, sort of describe our practice, how we do things, because we're really maybe a combination of the two, but for the most part, we sort of fall in one space. But sort of explain how we do things.
So basically on the investment management side, everybody in the group has both their 7 and their 66.
Right.
Because if you do any kind of like private placement stuff, even if you're charging an annual fee instead of taking the commission option, technically that's a brokered transaction. You have to carry it.
Right.
If we didn't do that, honestly, we wouldn't even have to carry it. But we have to have, because for some clients it's appropriate.
Right.
Basically the way our practice is wired up is that we want to prove to you when the question Brian posed, how are you compensated? Our answer is we're compensated by earning your business over and over and over again. Right. You don't have to just trust us up front. We are very confident that you'll trust us 5-10 years from now. We have a high confidence with that. So we build our compensation for a long-term relationship, not a short-term transactional relationship. Right? And so I would say in simplest terms, that's how we build things. Mm-hmm. We believe that on the, and we're going to talk about asset managers, portfolio managers, but generally we believe very simply that when you're thinking about what kind of options you need to provide a client base, it needs to be broad, far-reaching, and it kind of goes back to Brian, our creative side is that we're always learning, we're always expanding, we're trying basically as many options as we can provide for our client base. We will continue to find what those are and be very open to what kind of stuff is appropriate and understand that changes over time.
Yep.
Companies change, companies adjust. What we're going through now shifts around, different stuff like that. And so it's an ever-changing industry, and I would say that's really important. And we build our fees in such a way that we're professionals, much like an attorney or a CPA, and we know that we're going to do a good job.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add to that is, and So very, very early on when I got in the business, I went to fee-based advisory. The reason I did that is because I wanted to take out any doubt that when I made a change in a portfolio, I didn't want any client going, well, why are you doing that? Is it because you're trying to make a commission because you haven't traded in a while?
Yeah.
Or is it really my best interest? So to us, it doesn't matter what widget we put in your portfolio, our comp doesn't change. It's the same no matter what. Now,
Correct.
Are there tools in the toolbox that we can use where we might get a commission if we use that in your as part of your overall financial situation? Absolutely. We have to fully disclose that to you, by the way, so you'll know what that is. But for the most part, that's why we're fee-based, because we want there to be no question from the client perspective that when we make a trade, there's no benefit to us for doing it other than we think it's in your best interest. And that's another reason why we choose to custody everything at Charles Schwab, because there's no trade fees, which is great. That happened, about a year ago?
Yeah.
Something like that. Schwab said, hey, you don't care what you trade, there's no trade fee. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I would say because there are some things if we could charge an advisory fee for everything, we would. But there's some things in our business that it's not built that way.
That's right.
Insurance is not built that way. Long-term care policies are not built that way. You just can't do it. So you're faced as an advisor. There's some advisors out there that would maybe say something about us because we do those. And it's like, well, you're trying to service the client. Almost all of our compensation is fee-based. And we would never recommend anything that would ever damage the relationship or the client. And so there's some things like you get all these people that they're right, you're wrong, all that kind of stuff. It's just important that you build a practice that services your clients and takes care of people, right? Ultimately.
Yep, exactly.
And then they have a high confidence that every time you say something that it's the right thing and your compensation reflects that that's the right thing.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's move on to the next one. This is an interesting one. Asset manager. We sort of lumped in asset manager and portfolio manager. So what is your all's thoughts on, kind of what those titles actually mean, and what if someone's sitting out there, they're driving down the road or they're watching us on YouTube and they go, asset manager, portfolio manager, I thought that you guys manage money. I don't understand what the difference is.
Well, we certainly do. I think when someone is billing themselves or putting themselves out there as an asset manager or a portfolio manager, their specialty is in building portfolios and creating models and running those models. Usually what you're going to see when you run into someone who is billing themselves or putting themselves out as an asset manager, they are not going to customize their investments for you or your situation, or they're not going to run through the planning process with you to figure out the types of investments that you need. They're going to have X number of models. So let's say they have 5 different models that they run, and they're going to throw your assets into one of those models regardless of whether or not those are going to be appropriate for your situation. So they're running their models. They're focused solely on the performance of those models. They're not so much worried about suitability or running through a full-scale financial plan for their clients.
Yeah. And you said something one time, Eric, that I remembered that I thought was a good way to kind of put a barrier between the difference in a financial advisor that does investments at a firm and an asset manager or portfolio manager maybe at a wirehouse or something like that. Is the financial advisor that's serving as an investment person is basically like asset capture, right? That's their thing. So they're basically moving assets into that company's book. And then the other person is doing ongoing management. Their value is on the ongoing management. Yeah. At an institution, it's just basically capturing assets. And again, if you look at the compensation, it'll say that. So
here's the thing that I'm going to point out 2 differences, and this is one that I think is incredibly important. And if you get nothing else out of this show other than this point and one other, we're going to make not that you shouldn't take there are points. I'm just making a point that I think is important. I shouldn't have said that. You guys don't think that's funny. Don't listen to the only thing I'm saying, basically, is what that meant. All right, so
let's
anyway.
just hang out here for like one more minute.
I don't know. I'd get myself out of that one. Okay, so here's the thing. When you're interviewing an advisor or you're doing research or whatever, if you have an advisor that says they do everything, so they do portfolio management, they're going to sit down and do financial planning, they're going to sit down and talk about your life insurance and all that. It is being a guy that has tried to do that briefly a couple of times. It is incredibly difficult to keep up with the different planning techniques and the different products, and also keeping up with the market data and the market analytics and all that. It's incredibly difficult to do that. So when you go see an advisor, you might even ask the question, hey, do you, or if they say they're a portfolio manager or a financial advisor, do you do portfolio management yourself? Right? I mean, do you create their portfolios?
Yeah.
And if they say yes, be very cautious, because keeping up with just the sheer amount of data that comes out that you need to be in tune with in order to make the right decisions in a portfolio is really a full-time job.
Yeah.
Right? So we actually, on our staff, we have a particular person, PJ Fox, who that is his only role on our team, is to basically immerse himself every day in market data and market information and portfolio information and mutual fund information and ETF information and stock information. That's all his role is to immerse himself in that information, so that when we sit down as a team to do any sort of portfolio adjustment, PJ's there to say, this is the information you all need to have in order to make a smart decision on what widget you're going to use in a portfolio.
Yeah. And building a lot of relationships in the investment community too. So it's there's some firms that think they need to have 20 analysts or whatever. Well, it's like, okay, well, there's large institutions that have like thousands of analysts.
Right.
It's not PJ's job to determine what we call like a recipe, how should it be constructed, but it is his job to objectively sort. So even in a world where PJ does that every day,
right,
he's not even doing a big part of that legwork, because that would be inappropriate.
Right.
Like anybody in Louisville that thinks they can put the manpower to do a better job than these large institutions at how things should be going, but they're not great at the objectivity. For the same reasons we've talked about captive agents.
Right.
Those captive analysts tend to arrive at conclusions sometimes that serve the institution, but that's literally all he does, to your point. Objectively sort through options to like you're shopping for spaghetti sauce.
And
he literally shops all day.
Yeah. And the cool thing is, which is one of the things I think is so cool about our team is, PJ's role is not to understand the difference between an irrevocable trust and a revocable trust, right? I mean, that's not his role.
Yeah.
That's our role to do that. And so we have PJ on the team. He's a valuable member of the team, and his role is to immerse himself in the market and data and product to make sure that's not what we're spending our time on, right? We're spending time making sure, clients are getting through their financial plan, and, they're coming in on a regular basis, and we're talking to them about trust planning and blah, blah, blah. So with all that being said, that is just something that you need to know when you're talking to somebody. If they have that title behind their name, asset manager, portfolio manager, you just need to know, you need to ask the questions. Is that your only role, or do you're trying to be, try to do all of it yourself? And we just don't buy into trying to do it all yourself. We like the fact that we have PJ on our team. All right, let's jump down. I'm going to jump down to estate planner. I'm going to skip the next one on our list. Let's go down to estate planner. We see this not often, but we see it occasionally where when somebody says they do estate planning, are you an attorney that does, you write documents and you call yourself an estate planner, and you also might, because you're doing estate documents, you might also manage money for people? Yes, that happens, and I'm sure somebody driving down the road going, yep, I work with a guy that does that. Or is it someone that solely focuses on planning, and they solely focus on estate planning, meaning your estate documents, and yeah, they might still be an advisor? So how do you guys address that one?
Well, first and foremost, we're not lawyers, so we're not drawing up wills, we're not drawing up trusts, and so we have some trusted partners that we utilize to be able to do that sort of thing. But that's definitely a red flag when you go into a lawyer's office and they do estate planning, and we need lawyers throughout this process, and the ones that we utilize on our end, or the ones that we partner with, they don't do investments, they don't try to mess with that. That's our world. That's our specialty. We were talking about specialties earlier. That's what we specialize in. We're going to help, figure out what specific types of trusts or how to set up the trusts in a way that's going to most benefit our clients as part of their legacy, as a part of their estate plan. We're going through all that process, and then we utilize the lawyers to basically hand the information to them and say this is the way that it needs to be set up, and then they go do the grunt work to get everything put together. When you go into a lawyer's office and they're offering the planning and the investment services themselves, that's typically should be a pretty big red flag. Because when you think about what they're able to do and what they specialize in, that's just to the point that you were just making. Everything that PJ is doing, everything that we're doing from a financial planning standpoint, estate planning is a huge part of what we do. We have to take everything, all of those things into consideration when we're putting a plan in front of a client. Are lawyers going to go through and do that? No, they bill hourly, and they get paid, more or less on a transactional basis. So,
yeah. And could we have estate attorneys in our practice? We could, but it's very nuanced, much like what we do. And so it'd be really hard if you had to hire a certain amount of, how many attorneys would we have to have in our firm to service the needs of our clients? Quite a bit. Right. Because some families that come to us need a lot of the documents are very complicated to get it done right for tax purposes, for flow of money purposes, to the right people, preventing money going to the wrong people. It can be really complicated. That person should spend quite a bit on that document. Mm-hmm. Those documents getting drawn up right. Whereas a young family that just wants to make sure their kids go to the right place and the money's not too it's not too complicated with the familial structure on how to make sure things go to the right place, they shouldn't spend as much. So in those situations, we rarely refer the same firm over and over and over again, because the price per hour is usually based on their acumen, how complicated they are. And so that'd be the same reason why would an estate attorney be doing financial planning or investment management? Red flag. If a firm like ours had staff attorneys, it's mostly because they don't want the money to walk out the door, not because it's in the client's interest.
And in all reality, in my experience in doing this, really good quality estate planning attorneys, be it either where they are more focused on the kind of the simple plans, you've got more complex guys, and then you have specialty that do kind of Medicaid planning. They're going to refer that business out. They're kind of in our world where we're saying, hey, look, that's just, we have that conversation, but we're going to refer that out to one of our specialists so that they can take care of that for the client. It's the exact same way on their end. They'll do the documents, but if a client comes in and says, hey, I don't have a financial advisor, they're going to refer that out to an advisor. Just keep that in mind. So if you got somebody that's doing both, there's probably money issues, to be honest, is the reason why they're doing it. So you don't necessarily want to mess with it. Okay, next category. This is one that we see quite a bit, and it is accountants/CPAs. Now, there's some regulation that's, if you're a CPA, you have to be licensed and you can refer it out and you can get compensated and all that good stuff. But at the same time, we see accountants and CPAs try to be financial advisors. So we just want to be careful. Again, it's the same conversation when it comes to estate plan or estate planning attorneys or life insurance, property and casualty agents. It's kind of the same story, right? Just be careful. That's what we're saying. But you guys want to add anything? I got one other comment, but anything you guys want to add?
It's the same thing. The CPA gets an established practice, and then they get tired of referring the investments out the door. And so they and most of the story arc, I'm not saying in all circumstances, and they go, I'll just either get my license so I can, and I'll put them in some simple stuff and do the best I can, but I don't really have time to be an asset manager, so I'll just do more transactional type things, put them in stuff, set up the contributions, kind of let it go, right? And that is what it is. And it's just simply that they eventually they crunch numbers like they do as CPAs, and they go, wow, this might be lucrative. There was I do know a lot of the CPAs after like 2008, I feel like they kind of dissolved some of those. So I don't know too many CPAs that we've networked with that have had that service for a long time. They've established it recently in the last few years or something. It's really hard to do a lot of things really well. It just is.
I'll paint with a little bit of a broad brush here, and I don't mean to offend any CPAs or accountants that are listening, but when you think about what a CPA's job is, what an accountant's job is, it is to minimize your tax burden in any specific year. So you come, you give them all your tax documents, and they're trying to figure out ways to reduce your taxes in that specific single year. One thing we do when we're putting together financial plans is actually looking from a macro view, from a 30,000-foot view over your lifetime, what your overall lifetime tax burden might be, looking at tax laws and changes and all kinds of different things. Sometimes that means taking a tax hit today to save taxes in the future. Those are the types of things that we're analyzing, and sometimes the CPA is not going to be looking from a macro level what might be best for a client's overall financial plan.
Yeah. So the only other comment I was going to make is CPAs, and my father actually is an accountant, has a CPA firm in Lexington, or doesn't anymore because he retired, sold his practice. But with that being said, to Eric's point, and the conversation we had right before is kind of putting this show together, and that's when we were talking about accountants and CPAs, they are very focused on the here and now. What can I do for my client today from a tax perspective? What they have a tendency to not do is what's going to happen 10, 15 years down the road, right? Mm-hmm. So they need advisors like us to say, well, yeah, let's do some financial planning and see what this impact to you is 10, 15, 20 years down the road. It's exactly why if you come in here, by the way, we don't charge for you to come in and talk to us and see, learn about our process and how we do things. And one of the things that we're going to tell you typically in the very first meeting is we're going to lay out how many times roughly we're going to meet per year. Now, it's client specific and client needs specific and all that sort of thing. But one of the meetings that we talk about is the end of the meeting or at the end of the year, we typically do tax planning. And that involves us communicating with your tax preparer, whether it's your
sometimes in the meeting.
Most of the time it's in the meeting,
yeah.
Right? Because it's a great time of year. They've already done the extensions for personal and corporate. They've not geared up yet for the beginning of the year. It's a great time of year to go meet with your CPA. That's why we coordinate it that way. But we're going to sit down at the end of the year. And to Eric's point, which is a great point, sometimes our conversation is does it make sense, or what kind of financial impact if this particular client does this transaction this year, even though it's going to be a big tax year, but we know it's going to benefit them 5, 10, 15 years down the road. But we want their CPA to say, here is what the potential tax burden is going to be. And oh, yes, by the way, I can run some future projections and show you that, yes, it is a benefit, right? Yeah. And so as another example, I've got several clients that we sit down with their CPA at the end of every year, and we go, how much they're retired, not quite 72 now, which is the RMD requirement, but we sit down with them every year, and I know that both of you guys do this because we talk about it, and we go, how much money can we take out of their IRA this year to not greatly impact them from a tax perspective, because we're trying to minimize the impact of the RMDs when they turn 72. And we're in a very low tax environment. And I can assure you we're in 2020. There's no way taxes are not going up after this debacle we've just been through over the last 4 or 5 months. So with that being said, it's even a more important conversation that we sit down with the tax preparers and say, what kind of tax impact is this client going to have by doing this particular transaction? And the only way we can do that is if we have and work in coordination with your tax preparer. So that is something we do. It's on the agenda. And it literally says when you come in and see us that we work with your tax preparer at the end of the year for tax planning. So that's huge. And we certainly wouldn't recommend an accountant or a CPA to our clients that's going to turn right around and say, well, yes, this is the impact to you. Oh, by the way, I can open up a Roth IRA or an IRA and I can invest you in some mutual funds or whatever. We're just not going to do that. Because again, our purpose of working with any number of the different advisors that we're talking about. We know clients have different advisors, right? You have a property and casualty guy, you have an attorney, you have a CPA. That's awesome. We just want to make sure that we're all working in concert together to give you the proper advice. That's the thing, because everybody sticks in their own lane. So do we, but we outsource when we need to get the proper advice.
Yeah, and they oftentimes all these parties work against each other. Right, they're giving counter advice, and then you as a family are like, well, what the heck? Yep. Our job is to build an effective team for your family that all are working together in your interest. And you'll be surprised what kind of ideas you come up with when Absolutely. You get a CPA in a room with a financial planner, wealth manager, and you have an honest conversation and the client's there. You can brainstorm some pretty good ideas, especially if they're a business owner. There's all kinds of different things you can do to pick maximum tax benefit
Yep.
at the right time. Sometimes it means more this year. Sometimes it means less another. It is what it is, but you can act in their interest. But that means that you have to have an unselfish attitude. Right?
That's right. Yep.
You have to be unselfish.
Yep.
Because otherwise you're not going to accept other people's advice or, allow someone else to make $1
Yep.
off of your client. And that's what it feels like a lot of times people are fighting over that stuff, and it's crazy. It doesn't work.
Yep. All right, so the last one we're going to tackle is, which I think is another one outside of financial advisor that is often used, and that is financial planner / wealth manager. We're going to tie those two together. So I want to get your all's thoughts on how you see if you're, I don't know, you're doing your due diligence trying to find a good advisor, and you see that title. What do you think of when you see that, or what are some of the things that you might want to look at when you see somebody that says they're a financial planner or a wealth manager?
Well, I think the average consumer is not going to understand the difference between the two. So we probably want to outline what that difference is. If someone is putting themselves out there as a financial advisor, you typically think, oh, that's someone that's going to manage my money. Well, most people are going to hear financial planner and they're going to think, oh, that's basically the same thing. Not really. A financial planner is going to come, everything that a financial planner does at its core is going to come based off of a financial plan that we run and implement. Mm-hmm. And whatever advice, whatever asset management, anything else that we recommend is going to come as a result of the financial plan that we put together for the clients. So that's why we're doing discovery meetings. We're finding out what your goals are, income, assets, budget, things that it's still funny to me when prospects come in for their first meeting and they're like, why are you asking about my family history? Why are you asking about all, my kids and all these things? Because we want to get a very complete picture. We want to find out where all your different puzzle pieces are. Mm-hmm. And a financial planner's true job at the end of the day is to take all those different puzzle pieces that you have around your personal life, financial life, insurance, investments, and we need to figure out the best, most efficient way to put all of those puzzle pieces together.
Yeah.
Until that part is done, we can't make any advice. We can't make any recommendations as far as investments or insurance goes. Everything that we do recommend, and then this is where a good financial planner comes into play, is going to come as a result of the plan that we put together. But that's got to be the first step in the process.
Yeah, I would say, so there's different phases. So the first stage of being a planner is building on your puzzle analogy. Most families walk in with big folders full of papers, right? Yeah. And let's say for the puzzle analogy, they're like got a gallon Ziploc bag with a cat puzzle, a dog puzzle, and a T-Rex puzzle in a Ziploc bag, all mixed up. They basically just accumulated stuff, right? Mm-hmm. I got this account here, this policy there. I got 3 different puzzles in one bag, and none of it makes a complete puzzle. Mm-hmm. So our job is to sift through an audit process and basically figure out what you have, and then see how it fits together, right? And then it looks like a ridiculous puzzle. Yep. And a lot of it was good things, done as best they could. And so our job is to kind of say, this is what you currently have. Would you agree? Might make sense to reimagine this puzzle a little bit. And that's when you go from planner to planning. And so it's not just printing a report one time. And I always tell families, they're like, well, what's the necessity for, having a planning relationship for 20 years? And I'm like, well, okay, so how long, take your best friend, how long have you known him? Oh, a really long time, my whole life. Went to high school with him, right? Especially here in Louisville, because that's the first question you ask somebody, where'd you go to high school? Yeah. And so you ask, and I'll say, it's kind of like that, right? What are the odds that the first plan we do is the best plan? We don't know each other. You're handing me all this stuff. And let's say we even do a good, thorough plan, and we meet 4 times, and I mostly ask you questions for most of that. It's more of just discovery. And then I put a recommendation together. What are the odds that that's the best possible recommendation, the best possible way for you to do that? Mm-hmm. And just be honest. Not likely. I'll do my best, and I'll do a really good job, and you'll think it's the best possible thing you've ever seen. But as we build a relationship, as we grow together, you're going to say something really strange in some meeting 2 years from now. You're going to say, actually, we were shopping for a lake house. Like, what? Right. Because there's so much. If you've never shared your entire financial picture with somebody, I'm getting a first look at that stuff. I don't know your heart. I don't know how you make decisions or you think about your money. and your legacy, you've never downloaded it to somebody, so you naturally aren't really gifted at just. It's not as simple as taking a thumb drive out of your computer at home and giving it to us. So that's why planning is a big differentiator. So there's advisors that are financial planners that run a plan, and you pay them for a plan, and that is not going to be the best, most personalized thing. Planning is kind of like the planner versus planning is, you go to JCPenney was open, you go to JCPenney and you get a suit, or you go to a nice tailored shop and you go and you make sure that suit fits perfect, and then you get it altered when you put on a few pounds through COVID, whatever it may be. No, that's kind of one of the things I would differentiate there.
Yeah, for sure. And the one that I always like to use is when the difference between all the other folks that we've talked about and what we really classify ourselves is either a financial planner or wealth manager. We'll put ourselves in that. I like the term wealth manager just because you're sort of helping clients. It's not just their portfolio. It's not just life insurance. It's not just your taxes. I like to say that we're really kind of full balance sheet focused. So we're going to look at both the asset side of the balance sheet and the debt side of the balance sheet. And the reason that's important is because it all affects your financial plan. So we can go in and say, yes, we're going to look at just your portfolio and sort of categorize ourselves as a portfolio manager. But if you're not looking at their estate documents or not looking at their life insurance, or you're not taking care of the debt side of the balance sheet, it really doesn't matter how great of an asset manager you are. If they keep accumulating debt or not paying debt off, or they're not protecting their assets in case of a death or a disability, it does you no good. So that's why I like to say we're really full balance sheet focused. That's why we're really helping our clients sort of manage their overall wealth. And that's really the way I like to put it is, we're very balance sheet focused. As a matter of fact, if you go to see, if you walk into a bank environment, for example, which I came from a bank, not the retail locations. If you walk into the bank environment and you go see, they may have financial advisor, wealth manager, they may have that term. But if you go walk in there and say, hey, I need you to help me on estate planning, they're not going to do it, I can assure you, because they're waiting for the next person to come in to do a transaction. There's nothing wrong with that. And like Eric said, if that's what you're looking for, perfect. Go walk into a bank environment. They'll do the transaction for you, and both sides will be happy. But at the same time, we have clients that come in our door all the time that say, hey, I need to update my estate documents. We literally take 1, 2, 3 hours in having conversations on what you're ultimately trying to do, what you want to see happen. So we'll spend hours talking about estate plan. We don't get compensated for that. We're compensated as a whole because of the relationship, but we don't make any extra money, if you will, because we're having a 2-hour conversation about estate planning. We think that's just what we do. It's just part of our service because, again, we're full balance sheet focused.
So the one thing, too, I want to point out is like with planning, most people kind of think about planning as retirement planning. And so you think about retirement.
You're going to see Isaac again with another funny video.
Yeah. So that reaction I just had was because the camera. I don't know, man. Like you got amateurs, but we're making podcasts, and we're going to keep going, and we'll figure it out. So at any rate, retirement planning versus lifestyle planning. So the one thing I'll say is what most people would ideally like to have is someone that's helping plan their lifestyle.
Yeah.
Right? Retirement planning is simply running an analysis and saying, is it viable for you to retire at this date and need that amount of money? Right? Mm-hmm. And so a really gifted, it's a whole other level to be a lifestyle planner where basically you're saying, all right, this is what you want to have. There's discretion. We've answered. They can retire. Well, then what else are we working on, right?
Yep.
And that's where actually clients get really excited because they realize you're not just going to manage my money. You're not just going to secure my retirement. We're going to have a lot of nuanced conversation about my legacy. We're going to have a lot of nuanced conversation about what kind of trips we go on. You're introducing me to some people I didn't even know we could do these kind of things. And so that's a differentiator too, is it doesn't stop at retirement. It's that lifestyle planning. And it could be that you have a lot of margin, a lot of discretionary things you could do with your money. That gets to, you have to have a relationship. There's no way you can get around that without having a relationship with a client and spending years together to do effective lifestyle planning.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, good. Anybody, any final thoughts from either one of you on just the different type of titles that we've been talking about and what roles they play and sort of how we differentiate ourselves around each of those players?
The only thing I'd add around the planning process is the plan, the individual plan that we would come up with for someone at 40, 45 is going to be dramatically different than a 55, 60-year-old. That's why, to your point, talking about a 10, 20-year relationship, that's why you have the relationship, so we can adjust the plan as the relationship grows and as needs change.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'll say this, that we have not come up with show, I think, 10, or maybe it's 10 or 11.
This is 10, yep.
This is 10. So maybe show 11 is, and we'll just go ahead and say it now. So maybe make sure you tune in next week. Yeah. Or if you're listening to the show, make sure you go back and listen to the show right after this one.
The next Wednesday.
Yeah, the next, yeah. But we're going to do, we'll talk about the difference between doing a financial plan versus doing financial planning. Very, very different. The purposes between doing a plan versus planning are very different, and the outcomes can be very different. So we'll tackle that next week, planning versus planning, or doing a financial plan versus planning. And hope you guys have a good week. We'll see you next week. And then, Eric,
if you're listening on a podcast through iTunes, make sure you listen, subscribe, rate, and review. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
The information given herein is taken from sources at IFP Advisors, LLC, doing business as Independent Financial Partners, IFP, IFP Securities, doing business as IFP, and its advisors believed to be reliable, but it is not guaranteed by us as to accuracy or completeness. This is for informational purposes only, and in no event should be construed as an offer to sell or solicitation of an offer to buy any securities or products. Please consult your tax and/or legal advisor before implementing any tax and/or legal related strategies mentioned in this publication, as IFP does not provide tax and/or legal advice. Opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not take into account the particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs of individual investors. This report may not be reproduced, distributed, or published by any person for any purpose without IFP's express prior written consent. Securities offered through IFP Securities, LLC, doing business as Independent Financial Partners, IFP, member of FINRA and SIPC. Investment advice offered through IFP Advisors, doing business as IFP, a registered investment advisor. IFP and Family Wealth Planning Partners are not affiliated. The information given herein is taken from sources at IFP Advisors, LLC, doing business as IFP, IFP Securities, LLC, doing business as IFP, and its advisors believed to be reliable, but it is not guaranteed by us as to accuracy or completeness. This is for informational purposes only, and in no event should be construed as an offer to sell or solicitation of an offer to buy any securities or products. Please consult your tax and/or legal advisor before implementing any tax and/or legal related strategies mentioned in this publication, as IFP does not provide tax and/or legal advice. Opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not take into account the particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs of individual investors.